Thank you for joining us virtually for this panel on a topic that continues to loom large in the new and critical tech space. My name is Trisha and I will be your host for the conversation today. So 5G's plethora of new applications promise a hyper-connected world. However, this level of connectivity also comes with unprecedented vulnerability, and a range of technical and security assessments now feed into one resounding conclusion, which is that a secure and resilient 5G network requires each plane, each slice, and each component to be trusted and secure. I am joined today by an expert panel of speakers who will help us navigate this complex set of issues. We have Mihoko Matsubara, who is the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at the Entity Corporation of Japan. We're joined by Martijn Rasser, who's a Senior Fellow with the Technology and National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. And we have Pukhraj Singh, who's a Threat Intelligence Analyst. And last but not the least, Beryl, who is a Visiting Fellow with the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you for joining us. So we will kick off with an opening poser to all of you, which is what are the key components of a secure 5G ecosystem? So we can start with Beryl, then move on to Pukhraj, then Mihoko-san and Martijn. Beryl, over to you.
Well, thank you, Trisha, and thank you to the whole team for inviting me for this conversation today. I'm really looking forward to hearing the expert insights that we have on our panel. But to get to your question, the key components of a secure 5G ecosystem, I think there are a lot of considerations here. So key components could include everything from the supply chain and the equipment, which especially for 5G will include hardware and software components that you need to build the 5G network. It could include the monitoring systems that will detect vulnerabilities in a network once it's stood up, and the dedicated cybersecurity workforce that would prevent the compromise of a 5G network and all of the other critical infrastructure that it underpins within society. So it's a really complicated question to try to address. And all of these components ultimately depend, or I guess they rather rely on, a strong and shared effort between private industry who have the technical know-how to build and maintain the secure networks, and the policymakers responsible for setting the security thresholds, not just domestically, but also in tandem with allies and partners that share similar values and goals when it comes to global connectivity.
Thank you, Beryl. Pukhraj, your thoughts?
The way we imagine 5G, I've never found a good definition of what 5G means, because 5G is not a monolith. It's again a mishmash of the old and new. It inherits the same kind of incrementalism that has affected the network architecture from the 80s. Now, I look at it from an epistemic perspective. Fundamentally, the whole hullabaloo or the debate around 5G actually epitomizes the struggle for access to information and aligning with the cost benefits of gathering that access. And this is the access which you're talking about, which sparked the golden age of surveillance. And so by hegemonizing access, by hegemonizing the underlying technology, standards, commerce, and information flow, you are in a position of information dominance, which is phenomenal. And that position is getting diluted for certain governments and for certain states. And that conflict, that tension, an almost existential tension, lies at the heart of the 5G debate.
Martijn, we can just get your thoughts in.
Sure, absolutely. So Beryl really covered the landscape, right, of the things we need to consider, and of course, Pukhraj was articulating some very interesting perspectives on that. I would just add, I think overall we really need to focus on transparency and standardization of security, right? Because part of the issue that we've had with 5G so far is that certain vendors ultimately are black boxes, so we don't know what's going on necessarily inside the radio access network equipment, and particularly as we start transitioning towards beyond 5G and 6G technologies, we really need to focus on making that security architecture much more open. One of the ways to do that, I think, for example, is mandating end-to-end encryption. So that's just one example of how we can create a more secure telecommunications infrastructure. But there's also the issue of vendor diversity, right, which Beryl touched on with her remarks on supply chain. With greater vendor diversity, you have market competition. I think one of the differentiating factors between vendors would be more secure offerings. So that way you have, a healthy competition that moves towards greater security overall. But I'll leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to hearing Mihoko-san's comments.
Thank you, Martin. There was a point you made there about end-to-end encryption, which ties into one of the questions later. But we'll come back to that thought as well. Mihoko-san, over to you.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So, as a cybersecurity professional, I'm really pleased to see that all of the conversation around 5G and 6G is the balance between cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, and also the balance between the cost and security. So to pursue supply chain risk management, as Martin and also Beryl pointed out, and I think that the ORAN is the great example to do that, to ensure a cross-vendor approach for fair and transparent market competition. And we just had the first in-person summit meeting of the Quad between Japan, Australia, India, and the United States. And the leaders from the 4 countries already agreed to commit themselves to support 5G deployment and diversification through ORAN. And they have already launched a Track 1.5 industry dialogue on Open RAN deployment and adoption. So I think that not only for 5G, but also for the 6G, the ORAN will be to remain as a keyword to do the supply chain risk management. But we also have to have a bigger landscape to support the 5G, 6G, and beyond infrastructure, such as submarine cables. So I'm really pleased to see that my country, Japan, has been heavily involved in Japan, Australia, United States Blue Dot Network to drive commonly accepted principles and standards to promote market-driven, transparent, and financially sustainable infrastructure development. And the 3 countries have already agreed to finance 30 million undersea fiber optic cable for Palau last year. And the Quad Summit meeting in September already agreed to continue the Blue Dot network. And I really look forward to seeing more to come for secure 5G and 6G and beyond innovations and public-private partnerships.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mihoko-san. Yes, I believe the Quad Open RAN Forum was not too long ago, and that was a very interesting series of discussions. And it was interesting to see 4 very countries that started with very diverse perspectives on 5G come together on this. So yes, it's definitely been very fascinating. We will move on to the next question, which again is addressed to all of you. And Mihoko-san did answer part of this, which is what are some innovative ways in which governments and organizations are incentivizing secure 5G rollouts. Mihoko-san mentioned some of the multilateral efforts, for example, happening within the Quad. What are some instances, for example, Beryl, in the EU level? I believe there's a cybersecurity toolbox that has come out, and we can start with your intervention on the question and then move to the other speakers.
Yeah, sure. So just to quickly touch on the 5G toolbox that you mentioned, I think the greatest thing about this document is that it sort of guides the individual member states towards a common set of considerations and measures to keep them aligned as the individual member states are working on their own 5G rollouts with all of their own domestic capabilities to set up their networks at home. And while it's, it is a guideline, it is a guiding document, I think it's great that this has been put in place sort of at the very beginning of the 5G commercial rollout, where things are starting to get rolling, so that all of the member states can hopefully have a more cohesive and interoperable system sooner. By 2030, I think is when the Toolbox estimates that 5G will be EU-wide, but that's also when we might start to see the beginning of 6G. So we'll have to sort of see how those balance out. But I think maybe this isn't quite an innovative way, but just the most important feature of incentivizing a secure 5G rollout is, as Mihoko-san already said, it's just through international cooperation and information sharing, targeted initiatives to bring along countries that maybe don't have the domestic capability in terms of economic ability or technical capacity to set up their own 5G rollouts. And so these international initiatives to sort of help the global 5G economy thrive more quickly, I think are key to ensuring a globally secure 5G system. I'll stop there and hand it back to you.
Yes, and just to follow on with a quick question, do you see some applicability of the guidelines laid out in the cybersecurity toolbox for other countries as well? Is this a model that can be adopted elsewhere?
I do. I think it can be a great sort of proof of the efficacy and how achievable it is to actually bring 27 different member countries into one cohesive framework for 5G. And this can be used as part of the EU's larger push towards the Indo-Pacific and helping countries in the Indo-Pacific set up their own 5G networks as well. So I think it does serve as a great proof of point that this can be done, and it should be done in combination with allies and partners, especially in Japan, who is so strong in this area already in the region.
Great, thank you so much, Beryl. Martijn, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Beryl and Mihoko-san that multilateral collaboration on these issues is critically important. But at the same time, of course, there has to be good coordination between governments and industry and academia on these issues as well. And we're starting to see some good momentum behind this, right? So such as the initiatives put forward by the Quad countries, for example. But I think it's also going to feature very prominently in the discussions between the United States and the European Union as part of the Trade and Technology Council. There's also some interesting bilateral efforts going on as well, including between the United States and India, South Korea, and Japan. One thing I wanted to point out, there's another interesting initiative coming out of the United States Congress. So now both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate have, legislators have put forward a bill called the Transatlantic Telecommunications Security Act. And this is specifically focused on helping certain Central and Eastern European countries roll out secure digital infrastructure. So where the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation would actually provide funding and loans to help some of the less affluent governments in Eastern Europe to buy secure telecommunications infrastructure. That would be hardware, but also software, which, in essence would be open radio access networks, and as well as funding rip and replace, so taking out the equipment of untrusted vendors. And I think that concept is a good model that can be expanded upon, right? Particularly if you have a group of like-minded countries, such as the Quad, for example, working together and providing more resources to countries around the world. I think particularly the Indo-Pacific would be attractive, but also Africa and Latin America. One recent example would be the assistance of U.S. funding and a partnership with Vodafone to win a contract in Ethiopia for a secure 5G rollout. So there's a lot that we can do, and I think ultimately we have to move toward a model of some type of multilateral digital development bank, some entity like that could really do this on a larger scale, and I think provide a very affirmative and proactive alternative to digital Belt and Road initiatives that China is funding right now.
Absolutely, and Martin absolutely agreed on the point that it's not just enough to promote secure 5G networks. There are also countries that may not have the capacity yet to develop and deploy these systems, and so supporting them, yeah, definitely an important element in this space. Mihoko-san, over to you. And I believe that Japan also has a very interesting system of tax incentives for companies for secure 5G rollouts, if you want to mention that as well.
So the Japanese government has actually launched tax incentives for telecommunication companies, but also the IoT service-driven companies to provide corporate tax cut. If the applicants can prove that they are investing not only in 5G-driven IoT projects, but also they are required to provide their cybersecurity plan and also incident response plan. So this is, I think this is a great example of how to balance between the cost and security. Because sometimes people have to say, oh, we have to juggle between the cost and security and convenience. And 5G, 6G, and beyond will definitely bring lots of internet-connected devices more. And we have great concerns over, legitimate concerns over security and also privacy. So I'm really glad that the Japanese government incorporated incentives, not only tax cuts, but also the cybersecurity components to that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Mihoko-san. We can move to the next question, perhaps, then. This kind of ties into Martin's remark earlier about end-to-end encrypted communications, which kind of comes in contrast with the fact that communications networks have been riddled with exploits and backdoors for years, including for intelligence operations, often domestic. So what is and isn't different about 5G? And tying into that question, what would then constitute acceptable risk in 5G infrastructure? Martin, since you triggered that thought firstly.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Trisha. Well, I think the biggest issue is particularly with 5G, with an expanding Internet of Things. There's a lot more attack vectors, right? You have all these devices connected to the internet, that in and of itself poses a risk. Of course, greater network virtualization also provides opportunities for bad actors to take advantage of that. While we're making good improvements in areas such as ensuring that hardware from untrusted vendors are not present on networks, there's still considerable risk. Anytime you build a massive network like this, you have to protect it. I think going forward, the only really good option is to adopt a zero trust architecture approach, because there's just no way where you can safeguard a network in any other format. So you just have to assume that there is an element of compromise at any given point. That's why I think in particular, just to echo what Beryl and Mihoko-san have said, is the importance of working with like-minded partners on this, because these networks are so vast and increasingly form the backbone of our country's critical infrastructure. You have to have a common baseline on security and mitigating these risks. Otherwise, the potential for very bad outcomes is just intolerably high. So that's, I think, the mindset that we need to move towards, because we've all seen how software supply chain attacks can wreak havoc. We have ransomware attacks, and then, of course, state and non-state actors that seek to degrade critical infrastructure in ways that pose a direct threat to economic security and national security.
Thank you, Martin. Pukhraj, your thoughts?
Now, telecom networks generally are riddled. They're teeming with the malware, backdoors or implants of foreign intelligence agencies. There are instances actually wherein a single node in the telecom infrastructure would be compromised by so many foreign intelligence agencies, by so many malware, that these malware or these backdoors actually have to come up with a mechanism to deconflict operations, so that they don't actually, these foreign intelligence agencies don't break each other's malware. That is the level of necessity of compromising the telecom networks. That is the level of strategic necessity of compromising these telecom networks. And the reason behind that is telecom network is the place, is the nerve center where all types of communication, infrastructure, and data converge. And so it becomes the perfect vantage point. It becomes the jugular of an adversary's information space. If you gain a dominating position on your adversary's telecom network, you can pivot from mass surveillance to targeted operations at a place and time of choosing. And you can use that access, you can leverage that access for signaling and for shaping operations. You can signal to the adversary, but you can also covertly shape the information space of the adversary. So telecom networks are an unprecedented vantage point where you could pivot from the strategic to the tactical as and when you want it. And this level of access is unprecedented.
The same question to you, Beryl.
Sure. Well, I think Martin's done an excellent job of laying out some of the really important key questions when it comes to determining what acceptable risk is in a network. And I guess I would just sort of try to take it maybe a bit broader. I think it's a really difficult question, and there's no single way where you can answer this. But with that in mind, I would start by saying it really depends on the perspective of the individual stakeholder, and there are so many when it comes to 5G. So from a policymaker consideration, it sort of comes down to who do you want in your network and who do you trust to be there, right? There are several leading vendors who are capable of rolling out 5G quickly and conveniently. And there's just no way that the market could ever support every single country having their own homegrown champion who's capable of doing this. So at some level, you will have a foreign tech presence in your network. And it really just comes down to who do you trust. This, of course, can be based on the political system and power for the country where the company is based, or things like the shared values for privacy and data protection and these sort of common norms. And this, I think, is where, getting back to that international approach, this is where the US, countries in the EU, Japan, they have this great advantage because like-minded partners already have this trust-based relationship and can sort of start to set these global standards for what it should be for the rest of the world. The considerations are different when you approach it from the perspective of a vendor. So as Martin already mentioned, I think the standards here are key. For example, with discussions on 6G, which we're really early into the research and development phases for this, hopefully the primary motivation will be selecting the best tech that will allow 6G to be set up quickly and most effectively. And it would hopefully be the tech that makes the most sense for the part of the infrastructure in question. but this tech might be proprietary to a country that has these different values and norms. And so now you have to navigate this question of, well, where's the technical trade-off versus the security trade-off? And from a vendor perspective, this could be very different than a policymaker. And just one last piece that I think is worth mentioning is that of the operators. And here I think economics are really, really key. Martin's already mentioned the cost of ripping and replacing equipment from an untrusted vendor, or how cost prohibitive it can be to set up a new network. And so this can be a hugely determining factor when it comes to what's your bottom line financially versus what risk are you willing to accept. And I just want to point out that these are all very narrow viewpoints, and certainly not comprehensive of each stakeholder's perspective. It's just a quick insight into the sometimes competing priorities that the individual stakeholders have. And this, of course, is just even domestically, right? Like once you start looking at this from an international perspective and trying to bring multiple countries into a framework of agreement, it becomes even more complicated and just adds another layer of complexity and priority setting to the equation. So it is a really tricky question, and forums such as this are key for figuring out these answers and sort of getting ahead of this question as we start to see 5G beyond and 6G coming into the forefront.
Thank you, Beryl, and thank you for tying us very neatly into the next question, which is around 6G. So even as we're discussing the best technical methods for secure 5G rollouts, 6G is already in the development phase in many countries. One, just to set perhaps the context for the viewers, the first question would be to Mihoko-san, which is, what are the potential use cases of 6G over 5G? And then the next question to you all would be, even as countries start rolling out 5G networks, should they start investing their policy and research energies into 6G standards and secure 6G? So first to you, Mihoko-san.
Sure. So there are already some ideas about 5G, 6G applications. So promising 6G use cases include logistics services such as home delivery using drones and unmanned operations, or highly sophisticated operations in primary industries such as agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. And applications to more futuristic use cases would be also like flying cars and space travels. So I really look forward to seeing them and trying them soon enough. And to answer your second question, I would say yes, or to start 6G related investment, because it makes sense to start 6G related R&D at the same time as the 5G rollout, since 6G technology will have significant impacts on our socio-economic activities, including privacy. So we must have a clear technology roadmap first to plan ahead, including policy planning, and addressing potential challenges and opportunities posed by the new 6G-related technologies. For example, 6G-related semiconductors need to achieve miniaturization, low power consumption, and high heat dissipation. And it would take so much time to even manufacture such new semiconductors. So that is why it is better to start now. And actually, that is why the Japanese government initiated a Beyond 5G funding this summer to support projects to internationally standardize, market, and operationalize the Beyond 5G technology.
Thank you, Mihoko-san. And yes, I truly hope we can see flying cars and space travel, commercial space travel in our lifetimes as well. Martin, would you like to take a shot at this question?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, particularly given the lessons learned from the 5G experience, looking seriously at all elements of 6G rollouts is critically important, right? There's already a lot of research and development taking place. China is investing a lot in R&D, but also countries like Japan, South Korea, Finland, Sweden, the United States. So a lot is already being done. So now it's a matter of how do we apply the lessons learned from 5G and be much smarter about the run-up to 6G. And I think in particular, what I would love to see is an international 6G policy and security conference series. So if you look at what the Czech Republic did with the Prague 5G Security Summit, for example, that was a very effective gathering to talk about some of the key issues associated with 5G. Now, with 6G, obviously, we need to talk about technology development, but we already discussed the importance of security, but there's standard setting and also spectrum. And particularly if you have the tech-leading democracies increasingly aligned on those key issues much earlier in the process, I think we can mitigate and perhaps even avoid a lot of the difficult issues that we're facing with 5G rollouts now. So yes, I would strongly encourage our national leadership, our policymakers, to really focus on these issues now, and that'll help all of our countries be very competitive in this space, but also ensure secure, resilient, and open networks, which of course will benefit everyone.
Thank you so much, Martijn. And noted on the tech leading democracy, that's a plug also for your paper with the Quad Tech Network that came out.
Right, yeah.
Everybody should go read that. It's a great paper. Beryl, over to you.
Yeah, I think we've already heard really great answers from Mihoko-san and Martin. The only thing I would add is that as we start pursuing these 6G, the opportunities that will come from 6G and its applicable uses, I would just point out that 5G is still developing as well, simultaneously. And we haven't seen a global worldwide rollout of 5G yet. And so the opportunities that will come from 5G will, of course, affect those which come from 6G. And here I think it would be really critical to look at parts of the still developing world who are maybe earlier on in their technical capacities. But once 5G is available, who knows what their domestic landscapes will look like and what they can then contribute to the 6G conversation. So while, to borrow a term from Martin, the techno-democracies, if I've got this correctly, they are key for leading this effort. I think there is a lot of space to start looking at these other countries as well, and just keep them in mind as we move these conversations forward. It should be truly inclusive. There's a lot of potential here, and it'll be really great to see how this sort of comes to the forefront as 5G and 6G both advance.
Thank you for that, Beryl. So this is a question that could perhaps affect 6G as well, which is that there's this curious intersection of 5G and disinformation, especially in the past couple of years. I don't know if you've seen the Twitter trend of people going for the vaccines and tweeting, "I'm getting microchipped to improve my 5G signal." So is this a fringe issue right now? This concern about the detrimental effects of 5G, and could this affect 6G, or is this just could this become a major concern for telcos and policy makers going forward? We could start perhaps with Beryl, then Mihoko-san, and then Martin.
I think this is a really interesting question. To be honest, it's not one I've really considered extensively. I do remember in the early days of the pandemic, 5G towers being torn down because that was part of sort of this pandemic-fueled concern that somehow 5G towers were contributing or making cases worse. I personally don't think this will become a major issue that industry or policymakers will have to deal with. I don't know if that's just sort of hopeful optimism on my part, but I find it hard to imagine a world where the technical abilities and capabilities that will come from these new technologies are overshadowed by just some different thinking parameters. Maybe I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Beryl. Mihoko-san.
Sure. So unfortunately, over the last several years, we started to see more and more disinformation campaigns taking advantage of the wider variety of social media outlets to jump on, piggyback the global level of crises such as this pandemic, or the prominent events such as presidential campaigns or this kind of 6G, 5G rollouts. So what we need to do is to, at the national levels, we need to do security awareness around disinformation campaigns. So, and I'm pleased to see that different governments and also social media companies started to do lots of security awareness campaigns and also rolling out the security practices to minimize the damages and potentially caused by those disinformation campaigns. So I still haven't seen prominent disinformation campaigns around 6G or beyond yet, but we should prepare because now we see that malicious actors unfortunately taking advantage of the prominent events.
Thank you, Mihoko-san. Martin?
Yeah, I don't see, the disinformation surrounding 5G, such as the arson incidents against cell towers or the injecting of 5G microchips with COVID vaccines, as being, it's just a symptom of a much broader problem that we have, right? With disinformation campaigns being spread over social media, and what seems to be just a much greater receptivity to these kinds of conspiracy theories around the world. I think it's a broader problem, frankly, that the world is experiencing a mental health crisis that has much deeper roots than just a fear of certain technological developments. There's something at the core of societies around the world that seems people are just more open to believing these outlandish ideas, and so it's a much broader problem that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, in the case of 5G rollouts, that led to some very bizarre fake news, and this is something that as a society we'll have to deal with. And I think particular, our role as thought leaders is to help our policymakers think through how we can better address these issues.
Yes, thank you all. I know that was quite a curveball of a question, but thank you all for giving some insights on this. So as we start winding up, just like one question for you all, and you could also add any concluding thoughts you have that you feel like we've missed in this discussion, which is that what are some technical and policy levers or rules of the road essentially that need to be adopted and adapted to deal with these new challenges of 5G, 6G, and then beyond? Mihoko-san, Beryl, and then Martin, final word is yours.
I think it's a balance between security and cost, and the both technical people and policy people really need to work together to address potential challenges posed by 5G, 6G, and beyond. And I think that the challenges will be around network and end user device components. And to facilitate a fair and open market competition, again, I think that the O-RAN would be the key to address challenges around 5G, 6G, and beyond related network devices. And for the in terms of the end user device components, I think an IoT security would be required to secure 5G applications. And an IoT security people also have to address privacy protections, data governance, and security. And since R&D and infrastructure development costs a lot, so funding support is also essential. So that is why the Japanese government adopted the tax cut as an incentivize 5G operationalizations, and also the projects like the Blue Dot network between Japan, Australia, and the United States would be a good example to follow to make sure that countries who are interested in investing in transparent and open and trustworthy infrastructure would not be left in excessive debt after the funding. And I'm glad that the Quad Summit meeting in September already agreed to continue this the Brutal Network project.
Thank you, Mihoko. And Beryl?
Yeah, so just to be sort of mindful of our remaining time, I'll provide my answer and wrap up my concluding remarks all in one. I think for me right now, the most important global consideration that needs to be adopted is just standards. And we've talked about this already a little bit in our conversation today, but standards are so important and so relevant for the conversations we're having on 5G and 6G right now. I mean, a really hot topic at the moment is Open RAN, and it's the idea of building a radio access network in an interoperable way so that different equipment can be brought in. As Martin mentioned, vendor diversity would increase all of these great things. But we need to ensure that the standards that are underpinning Open RAN allow it to function, or that they're set in a way without undue political or economic influence. And so as we start to explore the avenue of Open RAN, this needs to be at the forefront of consideration. And on 6G, we're already starting to see a lot of increased tension and rivalry in the tech space, with lots of competing domestic programs to design 6G. And I think the danger here is that some countries are capable of developing their own 6G ecosystems based on their own set of standards, which may make them incompatible with the larger international community, or which through design might deliberately exclude certain countries. And so if you have these different competing standards, this would have huge ramifications for the global economy. So for me, one of the more critical things to look for right now, I guess, would just be how these standards are being set and enhanced open and international cooperation around these.
Thank you, Beryl. Martin, you have the unenviable task of completing your remarks in 30 seconds.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'll just add two thoughts. One is the need for public diplomacy. So we have to continue to message that the use of technology from autocratic states has significant geopolitical risks, right? We have to keep hammering home on that message. The other is we need to counter coercion. So for any country that decides to forego technology from autocratic states, the techno-democracies have to be there to assist that country to prevent and mitigate any attempts at economic coercion that would be leveraged against them as punishment. So because we want to build this healthy global telecommunications ecosystem, we have to both warn people of the risks and assist those who make the right decision on these things. But thank you all so much. This was an absolutely fantastic discussion. Really appreciate it.
This has been a fascinating discussion. We covered quite some ground even in this short 45 minutes. But thank you so much. You did a great job walking us through this set of issues.